This Zoom replay video with John Michelotti was recorded spring 2020 and was presented by Catskill Fungi and Tibet House US Menla Online.
Oh boy. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Wyatt, for that great introduction. And thank you, Menla, for inviting us here and giving us such a great spot to talk about mushrooms. Yeah, I'm really excited to be kind of giving you this brief overview of fungi, what they are, how people work with fungi from growing them to medicinals, and how we can ID fungi. And it's a lot to cover in an hour. And like Wyatt said, we generally spend like a weekend from Friday to Sunday talking about all these different concepts. And it's a weekend-long Friends of Fungi event where we go on multiple mushroom walks. We make medicinal mushroom extracts. We get to basically grow mushrooms outdoors, indoors, and everybody gets to take home fun stuff. So this is going to be like a good overview of that, but also a great intro to fungi. So it's my hope that through this class tonight, we are going to really focus on, why fungi are important. Why would we want to learn about fungi? And some of that is to kind of establish it and really sink into some community resilience. Community resilience is important because of our different systems that are in place can sometimes falter. And so to be able to grow your own food or forage it in the forest can be helpful and sometimes necessary. So the other thing that I'm hoping is that through this, you're going to kind of understand the life cycle of fungi. You're going to be able to say at least one reason why they're important. They're in the environment, and maybe one medicinal idea about them. And so we're going to kind of start with the big picture and work our way through. So yeah, so let's get started. And quite honestly, I'm used to a lot more like back and forth interaction. So bear with me through kind of like the one person talking thing. And like Wyatt said, there's going to be plenty of time for questions. I want you to ask questions and kind of shout things out. So yeah, thanks. So the first thing I want to talk about is that fungi are their own kingdom of living things. They're separate from plants. There's 4 times as many fungi as there are plants out there, and we only have scientific names for about 10% of them. And out of that 10%, we only have common names for about 10% of those. So what we know about fungi is actually quite a small sliver to what's out there. But what we're realizing is that they're interconnected with so many other things out in our forests. And it's really a fascinating topic to get into because there's so many different functions that they fulfill. But I want to talk about what some of these main functions are. And I'm sure if you were to think about it, you could think about a few ways in which mushrooms have been helpful for you within your life. Whether you like to eat them or not. Maybe you do like to eat mushrooms. In that case, yeah, of course, they're delicious. They're wonderful to eat. They're a decent source of protein and things like this. But there's other things too. Like if you like fermented foods, fungi are responsible for all of your fermented foods. And so this is where we have a lot to thank for them. And to give you an overview of this massive kingdom fungi, there's a few different phyla, and one we're going to focus on are going to be your basidiomycetes, as well as your ascomycetes. And these, I know that's a technical term, but these are the ones that make fleshy fruiting bodies called mushrooms. So here's a great example of an ascomycete. If y'all can see that. Has anybody seen these out there in the woods? I hope you can get like a pretty clear picture of these. We found these on campus, on the Menla campus, at the end of the 2017 workshop. It was like the end of the workshop. It was Sunday. Everybody was going home, but somebody went out and under one of the apple trees in the front found a beautiful morel. If you haven't heard of morels, morels are really quite amazing and delicious, delectable mushroom. And morels are out there right now, at least in the Hudson Valley, and probably further south into like Connecticut, New York City, and things like this. So, yeah, they're an amazing, easy ID. And the way you would tell a morel apart from a false morel, a gyrometra, is by cutting it in half. And when you cut it directly down the center, on the inside of this, it will be completely hollow. Whereas if you were to do this with a gyrometra, the inside of it would have kind of like a gnarled, weird looking inside to it. It wouldn't be hollow, that's for sure. And so this is where some mushrooms are pretty easy to ID. And I just want to give a shout out to Gary Linkoff, who wrote the Audubon's Guide to North American Mushrooms, which, as far as identification goes, is a book you can start your mushroom habit with and end it with, because it's a fantastic book. No book is absolutely complete, but this is a good one for learning your identification. And it has all different kinds of pictures that you can see, that you can then look up and compare what it is you're seeing. He also wrote the Mushroom Hunter Revised, the Complete Mushroom Hunter Revised. And in this revised edition, I helped to write a chapter in the back about cultivation, like 5 easy ways to cultivate. But what's fun about this book is you can even see on the side, there's kind of like a green side and a red side. The green side are your edibles, the red side are your maybe poisonous mushrooms. It also goes into mushroom art and mushroom recipes. And I'll try to move slow because of the camera, but this is a clear picture of the difference between the inside of a morel, which is kind of white and hollow, and the inside of a false morel, which kind of has a look like this by my pinky. And some people would say, oh, I'd never mistaken those two, but it's always good to cut those in half to make sure. So those are your ascomycetes. You also have basidiomycetes, but I want to talk about life cycle. Like, okay, we're seeing mushrooms out there, but why? Like, what are they doing? Why are there mushrooms here? And basically, the life cycle of these basidiomycetes and ascomycetes, you can sum it up into like 3 easy steps if you want to break it down, but it starts with mushrooms. And I'm just going to show you like this. This is a stropharia. And wait a minute, why would we look at that when we can look at this? Okay, so this is a stropharia, rugoso annulata, or wine cap stropharia. You can see this burgundy red cap on the top. They don't all have holes, like bug holes in them, but this one does. And just a quick aside, just because a bug or an animal is eating your mushrooms doesn't make them edible. There's certain things like flying squirrels can eat truffles. They can also eat poisonous amanitas. And amanitas are one of these mushrooms that will cause liver failure for us and is deadly toxic. But flying squirrels can eat them because they have something that in their stomachs that bind to the amatoxins and they can pass it. So don't go eat mushrooms just because other things are eating them. But back to this one, this wine cap stropharia, we grew out in the garden. And so let's say the life cycle starts with the mushroom. Mushrooms you can think of like the fruiting body of fungi. What that means is like an apple on an apple tree, where the function of the apple is to make seeds, right? So that the seeds land in soil somewhere else, start more apple trees, makes more apples and things like that. Well, you can think of the similar function to the mushroom as making spores. And spores are microscopic, and they're generally formed on the underneath side. And in this case, it's formed in these gills on the underneath side under this mushroom. And spores, oh wow, look, here's a little bit on the finger. Spores are microscopic. So they're too small to see with your naked eye. So like even all these spores, if there's enough spores to see on my finger, there's thousands of them. In every square millimeter of air, there's about 1,000 spores. And spores circle the globe. They're everywhere, all around us. There's not a breath of air you haven't taken that you're not breathing in spores. So, great. Thanks for that, Ed. Yeah, so as far as these spores go, they are incredibly resilient. They can actually be frozen in rock and ice and pass through the Earth's atmosphere. They found that spores can resist radiation of outer space and still fruit. They've taken ice core samples from Antarctica from millions of years ago, taken them up that have been frozen in ice, and still gotten them to germinate. So these are incredibly resilient beings. And when spores get released, they send out little hyphae. And hyphae you can think of like the beginning strands of the living body of fungi. And these hyphae, when the spore hyphae connect, and they're from the same species and they have similar compatible DNA, they'll start an interconnected network called mycelium. And mycelium is the living body of fungi. It's alive all year long, and it's serving a variety of different functions, which we can talk about. The mycelium is in our soil. It's in the dead wood. When a tree falls in the woods, fungi are in there, whether anybody hears it or not. And the fungi are in there, and the mycelium is growing through that wood and breaking that wood down. The way the mycelium grows in this net-like pattern is that it's excreting enzymes into its environment. It's a little opposite to how we eat food. Because this is kind of how we diverged evolutionarily from fungi. We're actually more closely related to fungi than we are to plants evolutionarily. And the place where animals and fungi diverge is that animals decided to have stomachs. We decided to have enzymes in our stomach. Where we take food into our stomachs, enzymes are released which break down our food, and we absorb the nutrients. Well, the mycelium is doing the same thing externally. So you can think of like this network root structure in the soil and in dead wood, and it's excreting enzymes into the wood. And it's breaking down lignin, cellulose, hemicellulose, the building blocks of wood, and then it's absorbing those nutrients through those same hyphal tips and translocating it through its fungal body. And when that fungal body, when that mycelium kind of grows and grows, and it's in a dead log, and it reaches the end of those logs, and it realizes, okay, this is my entire food source. And you know, when a certain season comes, because mushrooms are seasonal as well. You know, if it's spring and the weather is right and there's enough moisture in the air, and it's generally after a heavy rain, that's when the mycelium pulls its energy together and starts with like a little baby primordia, which would kind of look like even smaller, like a little tiny one, and then eventually fruits into a big mushroom. And then the mushroom makes spores, the spores make mycelium, the mycelium makes mushrooms. So I hope that makes sense. And we can talk a little bit more about that. You'll be able to answer questions, but right after I talk about what these fungi are doing out in the environment. I mean, aside from looking really good and delicious. Just because a mushroom looks delicious doesn't mean it's edible. Like I said, there's deadly poisonous mushrooms out there. So you have to triple check your mushrooms, is what I always recommend. And that means get yourself a field guide, look it up in the book. There's also tons of different mushroom clubs all over the United States. Hello, big shout out, Mid-Hudson Mycological Association. I'm past president of the Mid-Hudson. If you're anywhere, you know, Woodstock or Hudson Valley, Northwest Chester, and up to Albany. Great club, a lot of fun. We're always going on mushroom walks out there and taking people out, teaching, you know, whatever it is we know. And a third form of ID would be to there's not such great trusted websites. There's a few like mushroom identification forums on Facebook that are okay, but most places where people are posting mushrooms, anybody is saying, oh yeah, it's good, eat it. And it's like, no, absolutely not, please. Like, so you really got to be cautious there. But iNaturalist is a really great one. Mushroomobserver.org. On mushroomobserver.org and iNaturalist, you can take photos and post them online and post them at these websites. And within a few hours, somebody will give you what name they think it is. And somebody else might confirm that name. And the key to that is taking good pictures. And I'm going to teach you how to do that. I'm going to teach you what it is you're looking at. This is your typical looking mushroom. So there's a few things we're going to go over. This Stropharia is going to be kind of like our mainstay for this evening. You're going to learn all about wine-cap Stropharia, garden giant, Stropharia rugosa annulata. And this is what's going to take us all the way through these cycles of life cycle, but also how to cook them, medicinal properties, and how to cultivate. So, and if you come to a weekend-long workshop, you get this with a variety of different mushrooms. But yeah, so there's certain things that I'm looking at when I look at this mushroom, right? The first thing I always ask myself when I find a mushroom is, what is it growing out of? Is it growing out of wood? Is it growing out of the dirt? Is it look like it's growing out of the dirt, but when you dig it up from the base, you realize it's connected to a buried log? This is why it's important that whenever you are collecting fungi, you are, digging it out from the base to see the base. The base of the mushroom can tell you a lot about it. So once again, really important is, what is it growing out of? If you can identify it's a dead tree, great. If you can identify it's a conifer versus deciduous tree, fine. If you can say it's an oak, even better. So this is one of these things where learning your trees also helps you with mushroom hunting. So Stropharia obviously grows in the springtime, and this is an easy one to cultivate, but also an easy one that you can find in mulch. Grows in mulch, grows in wood chips. And this is why it's so easy to cultivate. Now, when I'm looking at this base, look at these things. This is the mycelium. This mycelium is very thick. They would call this rhizomorphs. And one thing I want to point out is the tensile strength of this mycelium. This is a single cell thick, and yet it's holding something many, many times its weight. So from the mycelium, the mushrooms come. But this mycelium is really what's essential when you're cultivating mushrooms, because this is what you cultivate. You cultivate the mycelium, and from the mycelium grow the mushrooms. So in this case, it likes to eat mulch. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So the other thing is, how is this mushroom connected to what it's growing out of? And these characteristics are going to be what is going to help you identify mushrooms. And when you can capture these characteristics in good photographs, that's what you can post on iNaturalist. It's what you can look it up in your field guides. And this is what's going to get you close to an ID. This one obviously has a stem. Not all mushrooms have stems. I want to show you a picture of this mushroom. This is called giant puffball. Giant puffballs are giant. They are an edible mushroom that grow like volleyballs in fields. They're generally in the grass, in lawn, and they don't have a stem. But once again, you cut these giant puffballs in half, when they're white inside, they are generally edible, undifferentiating white flesh. Now, obviously, you should triple check that mushroom, but it's also another thing to keep an eye out for. There's also littler puffballs, smaller ones that grow on logs, fall, and in the summertime, they can also be edible. Puffballs are another one of these top 10 easy edibles that you can learn to identify. And within the first couple of years, you'll learn to ID these. by going on mushroom walks, joining mushroom clubs. But this one has a stipe. And what can you notice about this? Well, I'll tell you, it's white-ish. It also has little kind of hairs that are peeling up. And it's got this ring, otherwise known as a partial veil, around the bottom of it. And I want to show you another one, because this is also a wine cap, and it also has a partial veil. And you can see that the partial veil on this one is still connected to the margin of the cap, or the outside edge of the cap. And you can kind of see those remnants on this cap. And that veil helps you identify it. And what that function of that veil is to keep the spores safe while they mature. And this is a very distinct veil because it has radiating lines on the top of it, radiating out, and it's very big. So not all mushrooms have veils. Some do. And so the presence of a veil versus not is going to be one of these things that helps you key it out. Now let's look at the underneath side. When mushroom hunting, it's good to have a hand lens. It's like a jeweler's loupe. It's a magnifying glass that you can look at small features. And one of these small features that's important to see is how the gills are connected to the stipe. And that happens right here at the apex. And in this case of this Stropharia, the gills connect right to the stipe. Whereas with other mushrooms, they might end right before the stipe. They would stop right before the stipe. And so these connect right to it. The gills on the underneath side, they at this point are kind of a grayish. But let me show you. Remember this one, while it's still young, if I remove some of that partial veil, or take this off, one thing you'll note is that the gills are more whitish. They might be off-white. And so that's one thing to note, is that mushroom colors can change throughout the life of it. So this is quite large cap. This is much smaller. Measurements between small to largest can help you ID. Smell is an ID, and we'll stop there. So there's a lot to it. We've talked about what it's growing out of, how it's connected to what it's growing out of, whether it has a partial veil or not, whether it has gills, and what the cap looks like. Some caps are slimy, some caps have raised edges on them. This one looks like it's been a little bit bruised, but something like this, also same mushroom, is a lot more of your mushroom shape. A couple other things I'll talk about is these stems are central to the cap, whereas in other mushrooms, they could be lateral, like oyster mushrooms, which is one of my favorites to grow indoors. So when you're out there looking for mushrooms, you're taking notice of this. And this is where mushroom hunting is very healthy for you, is because not only are you out there just outside of nature noticing things about nature, but you're noticing specific things about these mushrooms, and just being outside can help you really notice some of these finer details of mushrooms. They kind of make you be aware of this. And when you're taking photographs of your mushrooms for iNaturalist or mushroomobserver.org, you can take photographs of the underneath side. Since there is differentiation between multiple ones, I'd probably want to capture multiple mushrooms in the same picture, and do things like this. Now there's another spring mulch loving mushroom out there, and it's an Agrosipy praecox. Sorry, this one's pretty old. Almost embarrassed to show you. But I did get to ID it before it got all crinkled and wrinkled. But these have all sorts of similarities to the wine cap. And it also has plenty of differences, and you're going to learn them right now. So one, it doesn't really have a burgundy cap. It has a little bit more of a brownish cap. But the thing about the wine cap is when set out in the sun, this one's a little bit older, it can turn grayish brown. And so once again, it's good to note. But these are much smaller and don't get much as big as the Stropharia. The Grossaby praecox also does not have a very distinct veil down the stipes. You can see it's got a much thinner stem. And the other thing is that underneath the gills are browner, more brown than gray, like in Stropharia. Okay, so these also have a smell that's a lot more mealy. It smells very mealy, whereas this one, it's divine. So there's another thing that I noticed that I didn't talk about, and that is that these mushrooms grow in a cluster. Sorry, my hand's in the way. And that means that all the bases are connected and clustered, and all the stipes or the stems are growing from the same base. That can also happen with Stropharia, where they can have bases connected and the mushrooms are growing out from there. But the main difference, the 100% sure, is the spore color. Remember how I talked about spores and how spores are released in here? Well, you can do something that's really fun called a spore print. And the way you do a spore print is you would take one of these mushrooms and you take a piece of paper and you put it face down on that piece of paper, and you might cover this with a bowl and you'd leave it overnight. And what happens is that the spores from the gills will get released onto the paper and make what is called a spore print. And there is so much fun stuff you can do with spore prints. So this came from multiple mushrooms where I had one big one, and then I cut up another one and did different sections. You can make all sorts of different fun art from spore prints. These have blackish spores, as you can tell. They're blackish purple. Whereas, that's the Stropharia, your edible. Your Grossaby praecox, which is edible but not choice, has very brownish spores. And the way I can see that from here is that some of these mushrooms grow over other ones. And when that happens, the spores get released and drop on the cap of some of the other ones. And this is where you can get a spore print in the field if you're paying attention. And so this is where I think I can show you. I hope the camera is capturing this, but I think you can kind of see it on this one where on the front edge here, this is kind of powdery. And these powders, this powder right here is a lot more of a dirt brown, whereas their Stropharia, remember, is a lot more of a purplish black. So this is kind of like your beginner, easy, how to ID spring mushrooms growing out of mulch. And I hope some of this was pretty clear. And there's more that I want to kind of go into. There's another spring mushroom you might find, and this is called an inky cap. It's a coprinoid fungus. This is Coprinellus micaceus at this point. Sometimes the names change. And this mushroom is called an inky cap because once these caps mature, they deliquesce. And deliquescing is to turn from a solid to a liquid. And so this turns into a black ink, a black liquid. And it's been used throughout centuries where in world wars, they would take it and they would write notes with it. You can use it as ink. And that's where this came from, where we found this mushroom in the fall last year. This is a Coprinus comatus, as you can see. And we used the spores from this mushroom to make this painting. And this is just another way in which mushroom art is just ready for the picking. There's so many different projects. You can use mushrooms for dyeing wool and yarn. You can use mushrooms for really a variety of different art. And I'm happy to go into it. We talk about it through our weekend-long workshop when we're there. And I'm excited for all of y'all that are going to come out in September 18th to the 20th to spend the weekend having a great time making mushroom art and identifying different types of mushrooms and things like that. Yeah. So one of the things I want to go to now is I want to make a transition into eating mushrooms. I mean, right? I mean, seriously, why are we here in the first place? No. But eating mushrooms is a lot of fun. And I'm going to show you basically, we're going to talk about this, and maybe I'm just, maybe I'm also just like saving time, and you're going to help me prepare dinner while we finish this up. Just kidding. No, but seriously, I'm definitely eating these. And what we're going to do here is clean this stipe up. And generally you do this out in the field. So when you find a mushroom, you would field clean it before you put it in your basket. This way you're not getting a lot of bugs and things in there. And I'm going to save this. And I'm going to tell you why, because this is really important. But this is going to be my mushroom. Now, when I'm looking at this mushroom, I'm realizing that you know, the stipes or the stems are sometimes a little tough and sometimes take longer to cook. So in the case of this wine cap, what I'm going to do is I'm going to break that stipe off, and I'm going to save this for stock. I'm going to put this with my vegetable stock and save it to make vegetable stock. And now I have my cap. And what I'm going to do with this cap at this point is kind of do thin slices. And mushrooms themselves are 90% water. And that means that, you know, a lot of us out there have eaten some slimy mushrooms. Okay, this part looks like a little weird, so I'm going to cut that off. And that's either that I'm going to save with this little piece here. We're going to talk about why a little bit later in cultivation. So I slice these thin, and I want to, the way I'm going to cook them to get from a slimy mushroom, which we don't like, to a crispy, crunchy, delectable mushroom, is that I'm going to put them in a dry cast iron pan. And these will go in a dry cast iron pan and simmer on medium for about 15 minutes, 10 minutes. And what's going to happen is that liquid is going to exude out of the mushrooms, and it's going to steam and evaporate. And as it's evaporating, you know, these mushrooms are drying out. So it takes a little while. And since it's in a dry pan with no oil, no butter, I'm going to be wang-jangling that and mixing it and continuously mixing it up so it doesn't stick to the bottom. Now, once most of that water is gone and the mushrooms start to brown, that is when I'm going to basically add my oil and butter. Okay, see this one? It's got a little bit of stuff on it. I'm going to wipe that off with my finger. Now, the other thing you can do that's really, you know, I wouldn't necessarily soak these mushrooms, but one thing that I would do is take a wet towel, a wet paper towel, and wipe them off. And that's really one of your best ways to clean your mushrooms, is with wet paper towel. And you just kind of wipe it off. I'm going to twist that up, save this for stock. And once again, we're going to slice these up. Oh, this one's a lot more crunchy and crispy. Sometimes with wine cap stropharia, they're even better when they're kind of small and little like this. And one thing about them as well is they have a nutty flavor. They're very nutty, and one of my favorite things to do with these is to pair them with nuts. So if I'm sauteing and they're starting to look pretty good and they're drying out and they're starting to crisp, and that's when I'm going to add my oil and butter. Only after like 15 minutes and after that water is evaporated. And this lends to a much more crispy, crunchy mushroom. Hope that makes sense. So we're just going to put these aside for later. Now, I did mention that the Agroscope praecox is also edible, but I mean, like, really, if you if you like really had to, I guess. But quite honestly, they're a little bit better to just look at and appreciate. And even though you may not eat them, it doesn't make them a bad mushroom. Even poisonous mushrooms serve a purpose. And some of these deadly poisonous mushrooms that are even in our woods that are out there, they serve a purpose. And some of their purpose is to interconnect the roots of trees. So fungi are out there, they're growing out in the woods, they're breaking down dead wood, but some of them, the mycelium is reaching out, connecting their roots with the trees and exchanging nutrients. Where the fungi is mining nitrogen, phosphorus, and water and translocating that to the roots of the tree through photosynthesis, is translocating sugars to the mycelium. And this symbiotic relationship has been going on for longer than plants have been on land. This is like how plants were able to come onto land in the first place. So your mycorrhizal fungi are out there. 93% of plant species on the planet have their root systems interconnected with fungi. And yeah, even the 7% that didn't used to and have evolved out of it. So even the shiitakes you're getting in the store, you can put them out in the sun, and they will hyperaccumulate vitamin D. So those caps that I had, I might leave those caps out in the sun, and that's why I'm glad they were grown outdoors. And the fungi actually accumulate vitamin D, which is really great for yourself, and it's one way you can be healthy with mushrooms. So your shiitakes at the store, your oyster mushrooms you go to the farmers markets, even those button mushrooms. The button mushrooms, the baby bellas, and your portobellas are all the same mushroom. They're all Agaricus bisporus. But all of them, if you put them in the sun for 4 to 6 hours, they will accumulate vitamin D. One other thing to note is that you should always cook your mushrooms. Mushroom cell walls are made of chitin. That's chitin. Chitin is a very hard, dense material, natural material that is the same thing as lobster shells, mollusk shells, and only 1/10 of us still have the digestive enzymes to break them down. So this is why by heating your mushrooms, you're breaking apart the chitin, you're getting the proteins, thiamine, niacin, and different nutrients from mushrooms. So always cook your mushrooms. Yeah, so that's kind of like a brief overview of fungi, and a little bit how to cook them and how to ID some spring mulch-loving mushrooms. Why don't we open it up to questions for we'll take like 2 or 3 questions, and then we're going to delve into cultivation.
Great. So John, we've got one question in the Q&A here, so I'll just read it aloud to you.
Thanks.
Mycorrhizal fungi connect tree root systems. Is that how trees communicate with each other, transferring nutrients from the mother tree to offshoots?
Yes, that's one way. Yeah, fungi are responsible for much of the communications that trees have with each other, and it's through that mycelium. And what's going on is in every square inch of soil, there's about a mile of mycelium in our forest, and it's doing all these different functions, and it goes 35 feet down into the earth. And it'll link up between multiple trees, like many different trees in a forest. And especially like if you're out there and you see a big mother pine tree and and you see all these other littler pines around it, they're most likely connected by a mycorrhizal network. And what's going on is, yes, these mother trees are feeding nutrients to the other trees, and then also they are sharing information. Like they are helping this tree to pass messages. And what's going on is if there's a parasite that attacks the outside of the forest, one of the trees will start building up like antibodies against that parasite. And because of that, the other trees, will start also building up antibodies against that specific parasite. Now, this is also going on without the fungi through pheromones. Like trees are exuding pheromones and other trees are picking up on it and doing these same things. But one of your main ways in which trees, the way trees are sharing nutrients is through the fungi. And you can have multiple fungi linked up with the same tree, linked up with multiple trees, And Suzanne Samard did some great studies in British Columbia about this, where they've had two different trees, I mean, completely different genus, and they shade out one of them, put a plastic bag over it, and the other tree will translocate nutrients to keep that tree alive. And vice versa, like an oak, they'll shade out against a pine, and the pine will translocate nutrients to keep the oak alive. And this completely changes what we thought of when it came to survival of the fittest and evolution and things like this. Darwin was a genius, but he had his own spin on things, had his own bias. And what we're realizing now is there's a lot more cooperation going on under the soil between microorganisms and fungi, and between trees, and between fungi and trees, and across kingdoms, that it's really becoming the way in which I feel like people have a big, strong reaction when they hear this, and for good reason, because I feel like it's time for us to start realizing that, like, yeah, you know what, cooperation got us a lot further than competition, and potentially could be a way in which we can strive for a better world in the future. Yeah, and I hope that answered your question. If you have anything else you want to talk about there, I'm happy to talk about it. But why don't we take one more question, and then we'll start talking about cultivation.
Great. So we have two questions on identification. So I would ask you if you could share the names of the books again. I'll share those in the chat.
Sure.
But somebody also asked, can you transplant a mushroom into your garden or your yard if you find them in the wild?
Great. It's a really great transition. Okay, so I got books. If you guys want books, I did bring books, and this is like for you to learn from and talk about. And so all these are for different reasons. The one that I recommended originally is the Audubon's Guide to North American Mushrooms. There are many other mushroom books out there, and but this is just kind of one of my favorites, a little bit biased there. And this is, once again, like a good thickness, and it has a lot of different mushrooms in it. Tim Baroni just came out with a book last year, the year before. That's a great ID book. There's many good ones out there. And it's really just finding what you like. In this book, it kind of talks about, it shows you a picture of a mushroom, and this one has veils. So these are the mushrooms with all the veils, which we know now are kind of like the ring that goes around the stipe, right? Well, some mushrooms don't have that, in which case you'd go to another section. Remember those puffballs we saw before? Now there's a section for puffballs where you can look up different puffballs, and then that picture will refer you to another page in the back that has a much more complete description. So other books break it up into spore color. Other books break it up to what it's growing out of. So finding the one that works for you. If you want, like, hey, look, just give me the edibles, let's get on with it. Like, I think this is a good one because it talks about, gives you big, bright, beautiful pictures. This is chicken mushroom. It's almost coming out. It'll be out in probably another few weeks. This is the first edible mushroom I ever ate. And hen of the woods, really beautiful mushroom as well. It's got great photos and talks about where their habitat is. Some of these other books are on cultivation. Let's say these, Mycelium Running. This was one of the main books that got me started into mushrooms, and is really a good overview of fungi and a really bright way of doing that. It's by Paul Stamets. He was the one who did the TED Talk, 5 Ways in Which Mushrooms Can Save the World. These two books are medicinal. This is Fungal Pharmacy by Robert Rogers. This is Medicinal Mushrooms by Martin Powell. Really awesome books for medicinals. And one other one that I'll give a shout out to is The Rebel's Apothecary. My friend just came out last week. And this is somebody that came on a workshop with me, really got interested in mushrooms and CBD, has been interested in mushrooms and CBD, and since took a course with Trad Cotter. And I helped to edit the content for her medicinal portion of this book, as well as it has a recipe for how to make medicinal mushroom extracts and things like this. But really user-friendly, awesome book, Rebel's Apothecary. And I also mentioned Trad Cotter, and this goes into that second question: how do we, take mushrooms from the yard and grow them at our house. Does this look familiar? Can you guys ID this? Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. That's Stropharia. That's wine cap Stropharia. You got that. That's one out of 1, 2, 3, you know. And you kind of know this one. These are the morels that I'm looking for. So anyway, how do you do it? That leads us to the next part of our talk. How are we going to take mushrooms and grow them in our yards? And for this specific case, that's why I chose to talk about wine cap Stropharia. Because remember these that we cut off? Well, let's just do a little revisit. This is also mulch. And so what's going to happen here is I'm going to take this stem butt. And remember, a part of it I'm going to use for stock. But then the bottom part that has some of the soil, has the mycelium, and it has a little bit of the mulch in the stem, I'm going to break up into little pieces. Forget the knife. I'm just going to break it up into little pieces. And it's really soft and spongy. It's kind of nice in the fingers. But this, one thing I'll tell you about mushrooms is that they're just condensed mycelium. So this is just condensed mycelium where if we introduce this to the food source it likes to eat, it'll run. And that's what we're going to do. So we basically are taking our Stropharia, our wine cap, and you can break up these stems and you can introduce them to mulch like this, and you basically cover this with more mulch, and before you know it, look, it's like a cooking show. I just pull it out and it's already got mycelium on it. Yeah, it already myceliates. And that's one way to cultivate. The other way we can cultivate mushrooms is that since I actually did already grow mycelium on these mulch, is I can take this handful of mulch and I can introduce it to fresh mulch. And when I say fresh mulch, I mean it has not been inoculated by anything else. It's been recently chipped. And I can take those wood chips and these wood chips and combine them, and this mycelium will grow on those. And so that's how I've grown these, is in the garden. I've taken mulch from another Stropharia bed, and I do something called sheet mulching, where you put cardboard down, you put a layer of cardboard on the grass or on the ground, then you wet that cardboard with a hose or with water. And so you have wet cardboard down there, and that kind of keeps from weeds and other fungi from getting up from the bottom. And then you put a fresh mulch down in at least 4 inches. And then you grab handfuls of this Stropharia that has mycelium on it, and you're going to bury that in that mulch and water it. And you probably only have to water it like once or twice the first week. And then it takes about 2 months, but that mycelium will run through that whole mulch patch and start coming up. And then what do? That's when you get a 5-gallon bucket and you fill it up with that myceliated Stropharia mulch, and you go to your neighbor's house and you can mix it in with theirs, and now they're growing mushrooms. And this is kind of the beauty of how easy it is to be resilient with mushrooms, because anybody that's already putting fresh mulch down, you can incorporate this in your garden. And Garden Giant, they call it that for a reason. It's a great companion to your plants. It can help break down healthy, that wood to make healthy soil and produce healthy mushrooms. It can tolerate full sun. It's one of these things that is one of your easiest ways to do it. And if you don't have a local mushroom patch to go raid and get your mycelium from, there's plenty of places out there you can get Stropharia mycelium. One of my favorite places, I'll give a shout out to Field and Forest Products. Field and Forest Products has a great catalog for all different types of mushroom inoculation, from indoor to outdoor, things like this. And on the back page, they got their whole thing on Stropharia. So once again, you can get some Stropharia spawn. You order it from Field and Forest, fieldforest.net, and from there it'll come in a big bag similar to this, but with sawdust. And this bag is just basically mycelium growing on grain. And this is what you can use to inoculate something else. And so this specific strain, this is oyster mushrooms, and that's what we use in our 3-day workshop to make these kind of little oyster mushroom grow kits that everybody can take home. And look at this, right for the workshop, we got little baby mushrooms just appearing. And these oyster mushrooms will double in size every day. So in like 2 days, they're gonna be ready to harvest. These dried out a little bit, but I got them in there. And so there's all different ways in which you can do that same thing where you're taking spawn or mycelium growing on something and introduce it to a substrate to grow mushrooms. And so what we just talked about is doing that with wine cap in 2 different ways. One, using the stem butts and breaking that apart. Actually, we did it in 3 ways. 2, by taking already inoculated mulch and introducing that to mulch. And 3, buying spawn or finding spawn and introducing spawn to that mulch. And once again, you're going to do it all the same way. You're just using a different starter to start it. And I hope that's clear. And once again, I make myself open to questions and things like this. You can always email me, john@catskillfungi.com. And we can talk further into this. But really, just if you come to the 3-day workshop, you get to do all this and more. I don't know about you guys. I tend to keep big logs in my living room. This is a shiitake log. And these shiitake logs are, this one's oak. And what you do is you drill holes in the log. And then you take that spawn and you put it in the holes. And then you seal the holes with wax. You can see all the different holes kind of going up the log. And over the course of a year, and this just sits outside, not generally in the living room. And when it gets rained on, it gets weathered on, and after about a year, it takes about a year for that mycelium to grow throughout this entire log. And then you start getting mushrooms. And you'll get mushrooms for about 4 years. And so something like this, it's a little bit smaller, you'll get mushrooms like in about 3 weeks, and you'll get them every 2 weeks for maybe 3 flushes. So there you have it. So that's kind of like a brief overview of cultivation. And the last thing I want to touch upon before we get into more Q&A at 8 o'clock, I also might have some people on the call to introduce you to, and these are alumni of the Menla workshop in previous years. I do want to share some stories, even if they're not on the call with us, because there's just been some like really great successes and friendships that have built from this weekend workshop that I'm just like proud to talk about and feel really happy about. But the last thing I want to touch on is some medicinal mushrooms. And this also goes into kind of like some of the things that I work with. And the other part of Catskill fungi is making medicinal mushroom extracts. And so, this one is reishi, which grows from, a conch that looks like this, doesn't have a stem, grows on the side of wood, is this red lacquered look. And even some of the spores have landed on top, which is a dust brown. The underneath side doesn't have gills. It's got little dots that are pores. And reishi has been utilized for arguably 2,200 years and is something that is really great as a best overall for balancing blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol, immune system. And so I sell these extracts at farmers markets at the store. All these are from mushrooms that I grow or wildcraft on my family farm, and we do 2 dropperfuls in a drink once per day to get the different benefits. Lion's mane is excellent for brain function, neurological support. Chaga is really excellent as immune booster. It's really great also for digestion, detox, things like that. Just got an email about seasonal allergies and reishi. So if you want more info, it's on catskillfungi.com. But also, I want to talk about that, when you come on these weekend-long workshops, you get to make a tincture. You get to make your own tincture. You get to learn about chaga and the medicinal benefits of it, and you get to go home with your own made extract. So just wanted to mention that real quick. And really, there's just so much more. We could go on for a long time, but I'm going to kind of I'm gonna check the chat and then I'll bring it back to Wyatt, and maybe he's got a direction for us.
Yeah, so
Wyatt.
John, I wanted to let you know that Will Van Roden has joined us, so he's ready and in the attendees there.
Nice. Hey, Will, check it out. We just got him in the mail today. We got the new flyer. Doesn't it look great? Check it out. Will Van Roden came on one of the first Menla workshops in like 2017. And we hit it off, and he came on more mushroom walks that year than any other person. And he was the one that redesigned the Catskill Fungi logo. Yeah. It's like, that's why we have such awesome branding. Thank you very much. Will, how's it going?
Would you like me to bring him up? Sorry.
Oh, please. Yes, please.
Okay. Will, I'm going to go ahead and get you on audio here.
You. Okay, John, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How are you?
Okay, brilliant. Brilliant. Happy to be here.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much for coming on the call. Appreciate
Absolutely. What can I do for you today?
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for everything you've helped out with. These you can check out some of his stuff, willvanroden.com. But also, Will and I have kind of forged a friendship since Menla, and really what I'm trying to do is kind of paint a realistic picture about what the experience of Menla was like. So maybe you can share a little bit about some brief highlights of your Menla workshop and maybe ways in which it impacted you, since
Sure.
then.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like you said, I've been on a handful of walks already. And with each walk, I learned a little bit each time. And some of it you're talking about today is like a survey. And, some people might have more knowledge and some people might be introductory. But for me, I was slowly accumulating everything. And then I thought, okay, let me go one level deeper. And so I went to the retreat. And before getting into the retreat, it was a great crowd of people. It was rainy for like 1 or 2 days straight. It was awful. But at the same time, we were like, we're doing it. Like we all, put on our raincoats, went out into the woods, and we found so much great stuff. And that the food at Menla and like sitting around like all the tables and chatting with everyone. So socially, it was just a wonderful experience. And then, going deeper, more relevant now than maybe then, but, we're here on this earth, our feet are on the ground. How are we connecting to it? And so it was good to kind of go a little deeper in terms of identification. I started taking the extracts, but now we could make them. And then learning not just health benefits, but environmental possibilities and benefits. So there's all kinds of dimensions that one could take away. So it was like a small 3-day university program in my mind. So
That's great.
And then, out in beautiful landscape. So if for anyone who does want to go deeper or revisit, I think it's a great opportunity to do that. And yes, meet new people and just be outside and just focus on that for 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it.
Thanks, man. That's great. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Oh man, I remember that. It was so rainy. It was like it rained for days. Like even during like the biggest day where we had everything to do, it rained, but we made the best of it. Like Menla really came through. They had this big outdoor tent that we were able to use on the deck of the patio that had this gorgeous view down to the lake. And we were able to do the outdoor log inoculation out there.
Yeah.
And, we had this gorgeous like barn, this restored barn with big windows that we could do our different indoor inoculations and our mushroom ID. So yeah, we really made the best of it.
Yeah. And then after that, I've grown my own oysters a few times using spawn from you. And then I take all the extracts. And I think after the retreat, I took home my log and I kept it out in the sort of damp, outside area. And I grew tons of shiitake.
Nice.
And I think it grew, I can't remember because I know the log wasn't totally massive, but I think it gave a good 3 rounds of mushrooms. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So it was a nice takeaway beyond just the retreat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, and there's been so many like connections forged from that. Amanda Heidel couldn't make it on the call, but she was somebody that came the year after Will, 2018, and she got really inspired with mushrooms and started her own offshoot called Mushroom Shed. And Mushroom Shed became this kind of like community mushroom garden that's, people can show up and take different education classes and learn how to grow different mushrooms. We did an oyster inoculation workshop there. And over the course of it all, Will has just been so involved with the Mid-Hudson Mycological Association and Mushroom Shed that he ended up redesigning the branding for that too. It's like really sharp. So yeah, it's been great because Amanda has taken up this Mushroom Shed and started her own mushroom project in New Paltz that is now kind of flourishing and up and running. And other people from that year of 2018 also helped out during the Mushroom Shed launch and helped out to grow that into what it is now. And it's just really exciting to see so many different people kind of coming together on that. It's just been great. So it's fun to know that, for a lot of people on the workshop, it was just kind of the beginning to an introduction to a lot grander, bigger things. So, thanks, Will. Thanks for everything.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great.
Sure.
Thank you, Will. I'm going to go ahead and put you back. And we've got a hand raised from Marianne. If you want to take a question, John.
Of course. Sure.
All right. You go.
Hey, Marianne.
Almost got it.
Oh,
Okay.
I think I just made a mistake and I pressed the button. I am enjoying this though.
I'm glad.
I don't have a question at this moment, but this is wonderful.
All right.
Oh,
Well,
gonna
I hope we get
unmute.
to grow some fun mushrooms at
Great.
some point.
Oh yes, I hope so. I'm taking lots of notes.
Thanks. Great.
Thanks, Marianne. All right. Sorry, we had one from Ed. Let me bring him back up. Okay, there we go. Almost.
Hey, John, you can hear me okay? Great. This is just spectacular. Really appreciate all the information. I will most likely see you in September. I know that's a song, but whatever. Hopefully we'll be able to have it then. My question, and I did type it, I think, in the Q&A, but I just like to get a sense of what's the difference between making tinctures, what that draws out of the plant, having the plant, directly, ground down, like chaga, for instance, grinding it down and taking that in. Are we missing some some factors in the tinctures that we don't get in the live material?
Yeah, good question. And I'm glad you asked that. So everybody knows this is chaga, grows on birch trees, is something that is a conch. It's a parasite. So we talked about mushrooms that break down things. We talked about mycorrhizal mushrooms. There's also parasitic mushrooms. And it grows like a burl on the side of the tree and has a variety of medicinal properties. And what's going on with this is that, it's a really hard woody material. And so if you're going to process this, best to break it apart. And the way you could do that was with safety glasses and a chisel and a hammer potentially, and then grind it up either a meat grinder and some kind of industrial blender and into a powder. And you do want to do this with different mushrooms and different herbs, because the more surface contact there is between the menstruum and the mushroom, the more benefits you're going to get from it. The reason why we do a triple extract to make our chaga tincture is because each one of those things is getting different properties, and we'll talk about what that is. So the alcohol is going to get terpenes, like triterpenoids and things like this, and that is your antiviral, antibacterial properties of the mushroom. Your cold water is going to get enzymes, and your hot water, when you're making tea with chaga and things like this, is going to get a lot of your polysaccharides, all your polysaccharides. And your polysaccharides are going to be great for immune modulation, blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol, things like that. And, everybody, I run into a lot of people at farmers markets, just came from the Woodstock Farm Fest. I've been there every first, third, and fifth Wednesday. And it's one of these things where I get a lot of people coming up and say, oh, yeah, I know, chaga, you always want to harvest sustainably. And we go into that over the workshop, but truly do that if you're going to harvest anything.
Mm-hmm.
And from harvesting sustainably, I just keep it on my stove in a pot of water and boil it. And then I just take a cup and add a cup and I just keep it going all winter. I think that's great. And maybe you should think about taking the next step. So if you're already making tea with it, then after you're done making tea, the water's not as dark black anymore. Try soaking it in vodka for 4 to 6 weeks. And you're going to be getting different medicinal properties from it. So yes, you are getting different medicinal properties from doing these different extracts. Maybe that was a long-winded answer to your question, but I think it was complete. And if you have any other questions, feel free to email me.
Well, just a quick follow-up on that is, so if you do eat it, let's say you grind it up and use it as, in your tea, like tea leaves, like matcha green tea, you get the whole leaf. So if you grind up the chaga and you eat the whole thing, are you still getting the terpenes? But no, because they only
go right
come out.
through you pretty much. Yeah, because you need the alcohol to pull that out of the mushroom.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Sure. And also I'd kind of caution on, ingesting chaga. It's like ingesting wood. So it might be a little difficult on the digestive system.
Okay.
But the tea is great. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Ed. Sorry, do you mind, John, just going over the solvents one more time for us?
Sure.
Just to get that.
Solvents are alcohol, which I use a 95% non-GMO organic cane alcohol. Cold water, which I use Catskill Mountain spring water, and hot water, which is also Catskill Mountain spring water. The hot water extract, when you're doing that, you want to do it at like 175 degrees. You don't really want to go over 180 because then it'll break down beneficial polysaccharides. And we generally start with 3 times the amount and reduce it down to 1/3. And then you strain the mushroom out of that and you add the 3 liquids together. So after it cools. So yeah, that's how you make a triple extracted tincture.
Great. Thank you for going over that one more time.
And once again, if you're interested more, check out Rebel's Apothecary. There's some instructions in that as well.
Cool. It looks like that answered their question. Thank you.
Sure.
We've got one sitting here in the chat or in the Q&A from Kathy.
Mm-hmm.
She says her apartment runs a little bit hot. Is it possible to grow mushrooms indoors as long as there's no direct sunlight?
Yes, it's definitely very possible to grow mushrooms indoors. I did a webinar on growing mushrooms indoors with Bard Eats and Backyard to Table just a few weeks ago, and that's when I made this. And what this is oyster mushrooms on coffee grounds. I don't have albino coffee grounds. These are coffee grounds with mycelium running through them. So this I inoculated on the 7th of this month. So in 20 days, it's myceliated and fruited mushrooms. Now, obviously, these are just primordia or little pins, and they're going to grow up into much bigger mushrooms over the course of the next few days. This one I fruited a little while ago, and this one is from February. And it's something where what you're essentially doing is similar to what we talked about with the wine Capstropharia, but you're doing it with oyster mushrooms. And oyster mushrooms like specific food as well. And one of the foods that they like is coffee grounds. And so one of the workshops we'll do at Menla for the weekend is we will gather coffee grounds or other materials, cardboard. There's like a newspaper-based kitty litter that you can use. There's wood pellets. and you can kind of fluff them out with some water. And we add those to the mycelium of oyster mushrooms, either in spawn or even by chopping up the mushrooms. And we add those to your coffee grounds, and you can get, in 20 days, mushrooms fruiting out of it. And this is something that I want to talk about a little bit deeper, if you don't mind. So the way this is happening is similar to what we've done with the mulch. It's all the same. You're introducing spawn, which is, what you're using to grow in your substrate. Substrate is what you're growing in. So in the case of the mulch is the substrate, and the spawn can either be those stem butts, they can be the mulch itself, or they can be, a bag of grain that has the mycelium in it. And in the case of this, the substrate was coffee grounds, and the spawn was grain spawn. Now, let me just tell you about the possibilities here. You can take this one jar, and rather than fruiting mushrooms, I could have taken this jar, and once it myceliated completely, like it is now, I could break it apart and use it as spawn for other jars. So maybe in one jar, if I do it in a really good way, in very sterile techniques, I could make 10 jars. And with 10 jars, in 2 weeks, I can make 100 jars. And in 2 weeks from then, I can make 1,000 jars. So this is the exponential possibility of growing mycelium, of growing mushrooms. Now, this is nice, it's cute. You could do this in a 5-gallon bucket. And in a 5-gallon bucket, which, I know some people that live in New York City that they've kind of supplemented their income by dropping a 5-gallon bucket off at the coffee shop and getting coffee grounds filled up in that bucket, bringing it back to their apartment, growing oyster mushrooms in this 5-gallon bucket, selling the oyster mushrooms to the restaurant. So this is one of these ways in which, your imagination is kind of the limit. And one of the other things that I really want to stress about this process is that you're using waste products. You're using things that you would otherwise throw away, and you're upcycling them. You are taking it up a level where you're taking coffee grounds, which, coffee shops have to pay to get rid of. It's heavy, they're wet, and you're growing healthy food. And after this thing fruits a few times, the mycelium becomes healthy soil. And so this is the idea of upcycling. This is the possibilities of fungi. And this is kind of, what we try to inspire people to do when we're hosting these workshops and weekend-long workshops, and giving them the tools they need to do it and showing them a variety of different ways of doing it. And then you get to go home with all this spawn and, your medicinal mushroom tinctures, and you get to go home with a variety of other things. So it's one of these things that we hope to really, thinking big, changing the world, like taking some of that trash out of the garbage and growing healthy food and helping to, feed people. So there's a lot more I can go into that. There's disaster relief recovery things that Trav Cotter talks about, where, after a disaster situation, there's a lot of dead wood and debris laying around, taking that and growing mushrooms to make healthy soil and grow food. So yeah, we can go further into that if you want, but why don't we just leave it at that, and we'll take the next question.
Awesome, great. So in the Q&A, Steve is a really big fan of chicken in the woods. So he's questioning, how do you propagate it? And if coffee grounds work to propagate chicken in the woods as well as the oyster mushrooms.
Yeah. Yes, and this is where certain mushrooms like to eat certain things. Both oyster mushrooms and chicken mushroom or chicken in the woods are both decomposers. They both break down dead wood. Yeah, chicken mushroom. It has the taste and texture of chicken. Generally grows on hardwoods, but can grow on conifers, in which case you really want to kind of caution because it can cause gastric upset. Actually, there's quite a bit of allergic reaction that happens with this particular mushroom, but it's not. It's generally just like gastric upset or like a little bit of a rash, but nothing like anaphylactic shock or anything like that. But this mushroom, you should definitely cook thoroughly. It can be substituted as a variety of different chicken dishes and things like this. And one thing I'll say about propagation is some mushrooms are more finicky than others. So some need really specific growing mediums. They need a specific substrate and they need specific conditions for the spawn to run, and then maybe potentially different conditions for those mushrooms to fruit. And so with chicken mushroom, it would probably be like a little bit more of a moderate cultivar. And I'll give another shout out to Trad. You can get spawn from Field and Forest, like I said before. You can also get it from Trad Cotter. He's in North Carolina. I generally recommend people get spawn locally because it's adapted to your climate. But he talks about different ways in which you can cultivate different mushrooms, from oyster mushrooms to chicken mushrooms, indoors, outdoors, and things like that, in this book, which is Organic Mushroom Farming and Mycoremediation. So I've grown it on logs before, in which case, I got spawn, like similar to this bag, and I drilled the holes, and I put the spawn in, and got chicken mushrooms fruiting from there. As far as taking stem butts and growing it, there's a few different steps that are involved. And this is where like sterile laboratory technique comes in. But why not? Well, let's talk about it. You basically take a little piece of a mushroom, you take a petri dish under like a flow hood, and you take a little piece of that mushroom and you put it in agar. And agar is like, it's like a growing medium. And so you can see with this plate here, it's got a little condensation on it. There's like little white stuff. You can see the little piece of mushroom in there, and then this is like all white stuff growing around it. And then what you do here is once that mycelium grows from that little mushroom out, you would take a little clip of this and you'd sterilize your grain. And this is millet, and you'd basically soak the millet and then you put it in a pressure cooker. And then this is a specific bag because it's got a filter patch, which allows oxygen gas exchange, but no spores to get in. And then you would take a little piece of that petri plate and introduce it to your grain. There's other ways of doing this, but we're just going to roll with that. And then from there, the mycelium grows out on the grain, and you've made your own spawn. And if people want to get into that, that's there's plenty to do in the mushroom world. So I hope that definitely explained it. And if you have any other questions, feel free to email me about it.
Awesome, cool, thank you. Always
Sure.
an in-depth answer, I love it. Let's see who else has a question. So Stacy is asking, how do you get the most effective immune modulation from reishi mushrooms? And does making a tea from reishi have a perishable limit, or can it be stored in the fridge to keep it safe?
Yeah, good question. So when you are making a tea with reishi, you are getting like nearly, I don't want to say all of them, but you're getting most of your immune benefits from that mushroom, because most of them are polysaccharides, and polysaccharides are water soluble. So much of your immune regulating, modulating effect comes from that. Like I said, the alcohol has somewhat to do with the immune, but also has to do with like antiviral, antibacterial properties and things like this. When you're making tea, it will go rancid, yes. So you can put it in the fridge. Other people have also made like a really strong blend in frozen ice cube trays, in which case, you're just taking out an ice cube tray on the regular, 1 cube, and drinking it that way too. But I am going to say that, if you're already making tea, that's great. Maybe save some of that reishi and put it in your, alcohol if you have it around. Some people don't like alcohol. They don't like the taste, flavor, or effect. And so one thing I will say is that if you do get an extract, or if you do try one of these things of making like your own tincture, you can put it in hot tea and the alcohol will dissipate. So you won't be getting the effects, but you'll still get some of these health benefits.
Cool, great. And the second part was, how do you get the most effective immune modulation from a reishi mushroom? So I guess
I would
besides
say,
tea.
yeah, most effective immune modulation would be doing a triple extract, complete extract. Yeah.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
That I know
of. All right. People are interested in your chicken of the wood recipe, maybe handed down for generations, so I don't want to pry that from you, since you already gave us so many cooking secrets there.
Yeah, that's all good. I mean, you know, there's so many great resources, and I don't really have like handed down. No, I didn't grow up eating mushrooms. I grew up, it's poisonous, it's gonna kill you, don't touch it. Like it took me, you know, I'm somebody that was an outdoor guide for a long time and loved the outdoors so much, and joined a mushroom club. I joined the Connecticut Westchester Mycological Association, and I took a cooking class with Joe Brandt, who is president of that club, still president of that club. And he's amazing guy, really amazing guy. And yeah, he kind of taught me how to cook chicken mushroom for the first time, I think. And you know, with any mushroom for the first time, I always recommend saute and a little bit of salt, maybe, you know, maybe oil and butter. Like I said, wait for those liquids to come out and evaporate, then add your oil and butter, because you want it to get crunchy and firm. And that gives you like a good baseline of what the texture and taste of that mushroom is. But from there, really, there's so much you can do with that mushroom as far as like chicken recipes. One thing that I tend to do, because when you find that mushroom, at times you will find pounds. You will find like 10 pounds. And if you've ever found 10 pounds of chicken mushroom, you'll know after you eat it like 3 times, 4 times, it's like, oh, like your stomach it gets a little, and so you kind of have to take breaks. And the way I do that is I'll put it in a stock. I'll freeze it in a stock. And so it's suspended, it's sauteed and then suspended in liquid. And then you can kind of take it out regularly. Chicken parm. Chicken parm's a great way to go. Chicken piccata. All right. There's really a lot. There's so much you can do with chicken mushroom. And that actually goes with puffballs too. Those giant puffballs that we started with, they are one that, you know, when you slice thin. You can slice and also bread and fry it and do like a Parmesan or like how about a chicken piccata on pizza? All right, now we're getting into it. That was down another level. But yeah, happy to share recipes. One thing I gotta mention about morels. Morels. Love my morels. These morels must be cooked thoroughly. Cook them thoroughly. If you don't cook them thoroughly, they will cause projectile vomiting, which, as Tom Volk would say, is not as fun as it sounds. All right.
Great. We're going to need a cookbook from you here.
Yeah, there's plenty of them. And, you know, I'll give another shout out to these 2 books. The 2 books I'm in right now. Why not? But only because they have recipes. Complete Mushroom Hunter. Gary's got some really great recipes in there, as does Rebel's Apothecary for getting different benefits. So, yeah.
Great, cool, thank you. And
Sure.
some people were asking in the chat if we can provide links to all the wealth of information you shared tonight. I've collected as much as I can, so I will definitely send that bulk email along to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like we've only got like 4 minutes left, so if there's any last minute thing you wanted to share, John?
Yeah, I mean, if there's other questions, I'm happy to go that route. Otherwise, oh, believe me, I can talk miles about anything people want to know, really. Otherwise, I'll just tell you what I've been doing lately.
Yeah, we'll give it maybe a minute for a question or two, and then I'll.
All right, in the meantime, I'm going to tell you what I did lately. Okay, so I found morels, and morels are one of these things that are really difficult to grow. This is why they sell for like $40 a pound. They're mycorrhizal, which myco, M-Y-C-O is fungi, rhizal is root. So you have mushrooms that are really difficult to grow. All the ones that we talked about, from chicken mushroom to oyster mushroom to wine-capped stropharia, these are all decomposers. Your mycorrhizal mushrooms are like truffles. They're the reason why truffles sell for like $400 a pound, is because you can't reliably grow them. And so what's going on here is that, can you cultivate all mushrooms? Not really, but you can urge them along. And so I found some morels. This is something that I did a few years ago in the apple orchard on my family property in Big Indian, and took some morels that we found in the orchard that were too far gone, or they were, had bug-eaten parts or something like this, and we had to cut it out. We couldn't eat that part. You can put it in a jar of water, or a 5-gallon bucket of water, and you mix in sugar and salt, and you stir it around. And what you're doing is you're making a slurry. You're making like a mushroom slurry, because the mushroom spores are in there, and now you have little pieces of the mushroom in there. And out of the apple orchard, I went to trees on the other side of the apple orchard, and around the base of the tree, I kind of watered the tree along the bottom where those root tips are of the tree with that slurry. And from there, it was like 2 years, and I got morels under the trees that I made the slurry for, and the original tree. Maybe they were there the whole time, but it doesn't hurt and it doesn't cost anything. So I just made another slurry with a morel that I found, or my friend found, under an elm tree. We traded for shiitakes. I just had this big, unbelievable amount of shiitakes come out, and I was like, you gotta help me pick these. And so he came over, picked some shiitakes. He got this morel. It was like literally the size of my head. It was huge. And so we traded for those. And once again, I cut out some of the parts for it, sauteed it up. And I like doing them with eggs. I'll just like saute them and as a side for eggs. But then I made that slurry. And since he found that mushroom under an elm tree, I also put it under an elm tree. And this is where like it's important to kind of stick to the same habitat, similar habitat if you're going to be doing a slurry. But a slurry is something you can do with a variety of different mushrooms that you're finding. So yeah. Any questions roll in for the last minute?
That's awesome that everybody's saying thank you. We do have somebody just asking, are chanterelles found in the Hudson Valley?
Oh yeah. Yeah, chanterelles are great, I think. So we're all on the same page. Thought I had a picture. Yes, chanterelles are in the Hudson Valley. They're vase shaped, and their gills fork, which identifies them from the poisonous jack-o'-lantern, which is also bright orange and it looks like it's growing out of the ground, but it's growing out of buried wood. But the gills of the jack-o'-lantern do not fork. Whereas in chanterelles, if you look at the underneath side, these false gills actually start like one and then branch to two. So that's what you want to look for when you find these vase-shaped chanterelles. The other thing is many of these chanterelles smell like apricots. They're amazing. And yes, you'll be able to find them generally associated. They're in the summertime. They're like July, August, sometimes into September. And associated with conifers, variety of different trees. But yeah, let's go on a mushroom walk. Oh, I'm hungry for it. This time of year, I'm usually leading like at least 2 mushroom walks a weekend where we're going out with a whole group of people and identifying mushrooms and things like that. And recently it's just been me and my microscope. No, but we're still getting together. Different mushroom clubs are coming up with different ways in which they might be doing Zoom meetings where they're sharing mushrooms and looking at things. Mid Hudson Mycological we're going to be getting together as our education committee and figuring out kind of next steps. But I'm hopeful that potentially by I don't even want to say, maybe August, maybe July. But presently I'm doing small groups, private consultations and things like that. But really looking forward to September 18th to 20th at Menla. This is this kind of the event I look forward to year round because it's everything. It's so encompassing, and connections that are made are really special. So I hope you can be there. And thank you so much, Wyatt, for bringing this together, doing such a great job moderating. Thank you, Menla, for providing this platform and for being such a great support and so easy to work with and such nice people. Really looking forward to seeing you at the retreat again. So
Great,
thanks.
thank you so much.
This archive video was brought to you in part through the generous support of the Tibet House US Menla Retreat membership community and viewers like you. To learn more about the benefits of Tibet House membership, please visit our website at tibethouse.us.